It all started with flashing lights in my driveway and a knock on my front door that I wasn't expecting. I opened it to find two police officers standing there, asking questions about a complaint from the Homeowners Association *. The thing is, I'm not even part of an HOA *. My property, my vineyard, has never been under any association rules. So how did I end up with cops at my door because of them *? Let me rewind a bit. I've owned this small vineyard for a few years now. It's peaceful, out in the country, and I take pride in keeping everything clean, quiet, and within the law. No big parties, no weird construction, just grapes, a few chickens, and a dream of retiring here one day. The nearest HOA is across the road in a newer development, but I've never signed anything, never agreed to be under their control, and never paid them a dime. So imagine my confusion when these officers said they were responding to a report of unauthorized structures and potential zoning violations. Apparently, someone from the HOA claimed I was violating community standards. Not only did they send a formal letter before this, but now they were sending law enforcement to intimidate me. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Wrong address, maybe. But the officers confirmed, someone from that HOA had specifically filed a report about my property *. I tried to stay calm, explain the situation, show them my land documents proving I wasn't under HOA authority, but something about it didn't sit right with me. Why go this far? Why lie? That's when I started digging, and what I found next changed everything. Let's just say, this wasn't the first time they'd pulled something like this. But this time, they messed with the wrong person. So if you've ever wondered what happens when an HOA overreaches, especially on land they don't even control, stick around. Because what I did next, it made them regret ever stepping onto my vineyard. After the cops left, I sat on my porch staring out at the vineyard, still trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. I'd heard stories about crazy HOAs before, people being fined for the color of their mailbox or getting letters because their grass was half an inch too tall. But I never thought I'd be dragged into that kind of drama, especially when I wasn't even a member. It just didn't make sense. So I started asking around. I spoke with a few neighbors who had been living in the area longer than me. One older couple down the road, Jim and Linda, gave me the first real clue. They told me that the HOA president, let's call her Karen *, had a reputation for overstepping her boundaries. According to them, she'd been trying to clean up the neighborhood and had even tried to pressure non-HOA residents into joining voluntarily. When that didn't work, she started sending them warning letters anyway, hoping they'd just comply without questioning it. That's when it clicked. I remembered the letter I'd gotten a few weeks earlier. It looked like an official notice, printed with a fancy header and some legal-sounding language. But when I looked closer, it wasn't from any city or county office. It was from the HOA itself. I'd tossed it aside, thinking it was junk mail. I had no idea they'd try to escalate it like this. The more I learned, the more it felt like a power move. Karen and her board were trying to expand their influence beyond their actual reach, and I guess my vineyard, with its open land, visible fencing, and solar panels, was their latest target. Maybe they didn't like the way it looked. Maybe they thought it brought down their aesthetic. Either way, it wasn't about rules. It was about control. And here's the kicker. This wasn't just about me. I found out I wasn't the only one who had gotten that knock on the door. Other neighbors, outside the HOA boundaries, had also been pressured. That's when I knew this was bigger than I thought, and it was time to dig even deeper. I started keeping track of everything: copies of the letters, the officers' names, notes from my conversations with neighbors. The deeper I went, the more tangled it got. Karen wasn't just a nosy HOA president. She had ties to the local zoning board, and word was she'd been using those connections to pressure the county into backing her up. It was like she was running her own little empire, and anyone who didn't play by her rules got a target on their back. That's when I met Eric, a neighbor who lived 2 streets over, just outside the HOA line like me. He told me his story, how he got a final warning letter about a tool shed he built on his land, even though it was approved by the county. He fought it, of course, but suddenly got surprise visits from code enforcement. Nothing stuck, but the harassment was enough to make him think twice before making any new changes. He showed me copies of the same HOA letter I had. Same template, same signature. Karen, another neighbor, Nina, said she once declined an invitation to join the HOA voluntarily, and not long after, her mailbox was mysteriously knocked over. Twice. She never had solid proof it was related, but after hearing what was happening to the rest of us, she wasn't so sure anymore. What really got under my skin was how official the HOA made everything look. The envelopes looked like government mail, and the language they used was confusing on purpose. Words like violation, assessment, and compliance deadline. I could see how someone older or less informed might panic and just give in. That made me angry. It wasn't just about my vineyard anymore. It was about principle. I decided to pay the HOA office a visit, not to cause a scene, but to ask some direct questions. But when I showed up, the receptionist wouldn't even let me speak with Karen. Said she was unavailable indefinitely. That was strange, especially since I saw her car parked right out front. Something was off, and I had a feeling the real story hadn't even started yet. I left the HOA office that day more convinced than ever that something shady was going on. Karen wasn't just hiding, she was dodging. And as she thought I'd just walk away quietly, she clearly didn't know me. I wasn't the type to let someone push me around, especially not on my own land. This was my vineyard, my home, and I wasn't going to let some HOA bully rewrite the rules just because she thought she'd get away with it. That night, I went through every document I had on my property, surveys, deeds, zoning maps, anything that could prove I was 100% outside their jurisdiction. I also started gathering statements from neighbors like Eric and Nina. I figured if we put all our stories together, we might finally see the full picture, and maybe even have a case against the HOA if it came to that. The more we compared notes, the more disturbing it got. There were patterns. People were getting letters after making changes to their property, adding a fence, repainting a shed, installing solar panels. Anything that made their homes stand out, and every single one of them was outside the HOA. We started to realize Karen wasn't just enforcing made-up rules, she was trying to expand the HOA without going through legal channels. Quietly, intimidating people into behaving like members until it became the new norm. It was control by fear and confusion, and it was working. Some folks had already given in, started paying dues they didn't legally owe just to avoid conflict. But then came the moment that pushed everything to the edge. One morning, I found a bright orange notice posted on my vineyard gate. Steel work order. Non compliant est CHUR. No signature, no contact info, just a threat in bold letters. I hadn't even built anything new recently, but now they were escalating. They were trying to shut me down. That's when I knew it wasn't just letters or visits anymore. This was a full-on campaign. And whoever was behind it wasn't just doing it out of pride. They had something to lose, or something to hide, and I was getting way too close. Just when I thought things couldn't get any more tangled, I discovered something that flipped the whole situation on its head. While digging through some public records to find out more about the HOA's zoning complaints, I stumbled across a weird detail. The land where my vineyard sits had actually been mistakenly included in some HOA property maps. Somehow, an error in county records had blurred the lines between my property and the HOA boundaries. This meant that, even though I'd never signed up or paid any fees, the HOA technically thought I was under their jurisdiction. It explained why they sent those letters and why the police had shown up. But it also meant that the county itself was partly responsible for this mess, because their records weren't accurate. Suddenly, what seemed like a power-hungry HOA acting on a whim turned into a much bigger problem involving local government mistakes. At first, this felt like good news. If it was just a clerical error, maybe it could be fixed quickly. But as I shared this info with some neighbors and local officials, things started to shift in a darker direction. Karen and her board seemed determined to use this mix-up to their advantage. Instead of correcting the records, they pushed harder, sending more warnings, threatening fines, and even talking about lions on properties they claimed were in violation. That's when I realized this wasn't just about control anymore. It was about money. The HOA was trying to expand their reach illegally, hoping to collect fees from properties that weren't theirs, and the county's mistake gave them the perfect cover to do it. The stakes were higher than ever. I was no longer just fighting for my vineyard or my peace of mind. I was up against a system that had allowed this to happen and people willing to exploit it. But before I could take any official action, something happened that changed everything, something I never saw coming. Just when I thought I had the full picture, everything exploded. After gathering evidence and speaking with local officials, I decided to push back officially. I filed a formal complaint with the county zoning board, presenting the proof that my vineyard was never part of that HOA's jurisdiction. I also reached out to a lawyer who specialized in property rights and HOA disputes. The pressure was on. The county launched an investigation, and the HOA's shaky claims quickly unraveled. The mistake in the property records was confirmed, and it turned out Kara and her board had been warned about it months ago, but they deliberately ignored the correction. Instead, they kept sending threats, hoping people like me would give up and pay fees illegally. When the county moved to revoke their authority over my property, the HOA pushed back with legal threats of their own. But then the biggest surprise came from an unexpected source. During a public meeting about the dispute, a local council member revealed that Karen had been involved in other questionable dealings, using HOA funds for personal expenses and pressuring neighbors to vote in her favor by promising special treatment. Suddenly, this wasn't just about a vineyard or boundary lines. It was about corruption and abuse of power. The community rallied behind me. Neighbors who had been scared to speak out before came forward with their own stories. The pressure forced Karen to resign, and the HOA board was forced to undergo a complete audit. The county corrected the maps officially, clearing my property from their reach once and for all. Just when I thought the nightmare was over, I received one last letter, this time from a private investigator hired by the HOA's former legal team. They wanted to meet and discuss a settlement. It was a reminder that even though the official fight was won, the story wasn't quite finished. There were still shadows lurking, and I knew I had to stay vigilant. So that's where I'm at now, victorious, but wary. This vineyard is my sanctuary, but it's also become a battleground. And if you think this is the end, well, trust me, the most surprising twists might still be just around the corner. After all the chaos, I finally had some peace. The county's correction of the property records meant the HOA no longer had any legal ground to stand on when it came to my vineyard. Karen's resignation and the board's forced audit show that communities can push back when leadership crosses the line. It wasn't easy. There were moments I wanted to give up. But standing firm made all the difference. I stayed connected with my neighbors, many of whom had felt powerless before but found strength in coming together. Eric, Nina, and Jim became more than just neighbors. They became allies. We started a small community group to make sure no one else would face the same kind of harassment or confusion over property boundaries. Transparency and communication became our new priorities, and slowly the tension in the area began to ease. That final letter from the private investigator was a reminder that some battles don't end with a single victory. But it also taught me to be ready, to document everything, and to trust my instincts when something doesn't feel right. The experience opened my eyes to how easy it is for local groups like HOAs to overstep, and how important it is to know your rights. Now, when I walk through my vineyard, I feel a deeper sense of ownership, not just of the land, but of the community we're building together. This whole ordeal was a harsh lesson, but it also showed me the power of standing up for what's right, even when the odds seem stacked against you. If you're dealing with an overbearing HOA or confusing property disputes, remember, knowledge is your best defense. Don't be afraid to ask questions, gather evidence, and seek help when you need it. Because sometimes the biggest threats come from those who think they can take control without consequence. Thanks for following my story. If you want to hear more about how I'm rebuilding and protecting my vineyard, make sure to subscribe and stay tuned. There's still a lot more to share.